Welcome back. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. We will now begin the panel discussion for session 2. I'd like to invite all the panel members to turn on your cameras. We're excited to welcome 2 new panel members from the FDA, Dr. Matthew Diamond and Dr. Paul Schuette. Dr. Diamond is the Chief Medical Officer for the Digital Health Center of Excellence at CDRH. In recent years, we've witnessed the tremendous growth in the application of AI and machine learning in the field of medical devices. So Dr. Diamond, given your extensive experience with these technologies for medical devices, what advice would you give for their use in drug development and precision medicine? Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Chi. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, first, I just want to say it's really a pleasure to be here participating in this workshop. Some really great presentations and discussion. Applaud you, Chief, for creating this dialogue and the rest of the organizing committee. As Chief Medical Officer at FDA's Digital Health Center of Excellence, based at the Device Center, or CDRH, I'd like to share some of our experiences. For that, I'd like to first highlight CDRH's vision, which is for patients to have timely access to safe, effective, and high-quality medical devices of public health importance. And this includes, of course, digital health devices, and specifically those that are enabled by artificial intelligence and machine learning, or AI/ML. Now, as was already mentioned, we at CDRH have authorized more than 500 medical devices enabled by machine learning. And maybe I should take a moment to respond to one of the points Lucan mentioned in his presentation, a recent article that claimed to analyze the data used in the development of these medical devices. And I think, Luca, you made some really excellent points. And I also want to mention that the authors of that opinion piece made some rather broad and frankly incorrect claims, because their analysis was only based on publicly available summaries of data and not the full set of information that we at FDA use to evaluate algorithms. And since its publication, there actually has been a note added to that article to reflect the limitations of the analysis performed. Now, we agree 100% about the need for data sets to be representative of a diverse intended patient population. And I think the article does, among other things, highlight the importance of improving the transparency of information provided about these devices. And that's actually been one of our focus areas. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Consistent with everything that's been said at this workshop, we're seeing an acceleration in the scale and breadth of innovation of AI/ML in devices. And given the opportunities and considerations for AI/ML for devices and for healthcare more broadly, we issued, as I think Tala already mentioned, an artificial intelligence medical device software action plan, which describes our proactive, patient-centered strategic approach to these emerging technologies. And though our action plan is focused on medical device software, I think it's very relevant for our discussion today because many of the approaches and lessons are broadly applicable, including to a precision medicine approach. So I'd like to take a few minutes to go through the 5 aims of our action plan. I'll try to do this pretty quickly. First aim is to foster a patient-centered approach that includes a focus on transparency to users and health equity. And this is in line with what many of the presenters have shared so far today. To this end, we've held a number of committee meetings and public workshops, including one focused on patient trust in these technologies, one on transparency. Health equity is a strategic priority for us across the agency and the whole of government, and we're working on this area broadly, including in numerous collaborative communities. Now, the second aim of the action plan is to ensure that as industry is innovating, that we're also innovating in our regulatory approach so that the appropriate safeguards are in place in a manner that's tailored for software and specifically machine learning. And an important part of this aim is that we'll soon be releasing a draft guidance on what we're calling a change control plan for AI/ML software that will describe a novel method of oversight for a system that can change over time. Now, the third aim is to foster a good machine learning practice, or what we call GMLP, so that the appropriate processes are followed, tools used during both the development and the deployment of these products. And recognizing that software is being developed and going globally, we've collaborated, as Tala already mentioned, with international regulatory partners We work closely with the International Medical Device Regulators Forum and also have issued a set of harmonized guiding principles for GMLP with our partners in the UK and Canada, which I know Tala has already highlighted, and many of these principles are broadly applicable, and this work is ongoing. Fourth, we're supporting regulatory science, including to evaluate and promote algorithm robustness and manage bias. For this, we're collaborating with researchers across the globe on developing and identifying the right tools for algorithm evaluation and development. And lastly, we're committed to ensuring that oversight of these products is based on the total product lifecycle of the products, takes into account the whole system. And this aim as well, I think, of the whole action plan is very consistent with NIST's framework that we heard about today as well. We really appreciate the importance of understanding how products are intended to be used, their clinical context, how they're performing in the real world beyond just what we know from clinical studies, and what is their performance over time amidst changing clinical conditions. So to achieve these aims, we've been taking a really collaborative approach, working with a broad set of stakeholders. We really welcome all of your participation, and it will take progress in all these areas for these technologies to reach their potential. Mike mentioned anticoagulation dosing for patients as an example of the complexity of a precision medicine approach. And one opportunity that I'd like to highlight is related to this, and it's software that can be used to analyze data coming from a patient's wristwatch to identify atrial fibrillation, which is a common indication for anticoagulation. And there are clinical trials being developed to understand whether this type of data may be able to serve as a companion to medications like anticoagulation. And this is a great example of how digital health technologies could be used to collect continuous streaming data as part of a precision medicine approach to make sure that the right patients are getting the life-saving treatments that they need when they need them, and that other patients can avoid the burden of a treatment that has significant associated morbidity. We also heard earlier today from Eric Topol about another exciting medical device innovation. That's cell phone-based ultrasound devices, importantly accompanied by artificial intelligence-guided ultrasound acquisition. What these innovations can do is to put devices in the hands of patients in their homes, along with technology to help literally guide their hands in using those devices, overall to help move medical care into the home, to increase access to care, and so that treatments can be tailored to a patient's particular situation in that moment in a way that frankly was not possible before. And of course, these types of wearable and imaging-based approaches are in addition to all of the genetics and molecular-based approaches that come to mind first when we think of precision medicine. So really, these are very exciting times. We appreciate the opportunity to participate in this discussion and welcome the continued collaboration.
Thank you so much for the valuable insight, Dr. Diamond. Totally agree with you. It's a very exciting time. Now, let me turn to Dr. Foschini, the Scientific Computing Coordinator in the Office of Biostatistics at CEDAR FDA. Dr. Schuette, as a statistician at the regulatory agency, what aspects of the use of AI and machine learning in precision medicine do you find most exciting, and what concerns you the most?
Well, I think my colleague Matthew Diamond has already outlined so much from CDRH's perspective. Much of what we would like to look at are the wearables technologies. Things like continuous glucose monitoring, wearables for areas that we've had to use things like 6-minute walk, other sorts of tests, I think are going to be critical. Some of these areas, the current technology is proprietary. I think that's going to be one of the challenges, is how do we encourage open, transparency interchanges of data, and not just data, but algorithms and methods as well. So I think from a statistician's perspective, having very rich data sets to work with is going to be one of the key challenges and key changes for the years to come.
Thank you, Dr. Schuette. That's very helpful. Now let's begin our group discussion. So today we have listened to many interesting presentations and covering a wide variety of topics in this exciting field. I'd like to invite every panel member to share your opinion on what is the single biggest challenge in facing the responsible and effective use of AI and machine learning in precision medicine, and how can we overcome it? Anyone wants to go first? Or maybe we can go with the order of presentation. Let's start with Dr. Pacanowski. I know, Mike, you've already discussed with ChatGPT on this topic, but I'm really interested to hear what is your personal opinion on what you personally perceive as the biggest barrier for you to embrace AI for precision medicine.
Thanks, Chi, and it's enjoyable to hear all the comments from the new panelists and all the other folks in the session. And I will also admit I did attempt to have ChatGPT write the entire presentation, but it just couldn't make it long enough. So it didn't work out in that regard, despite my efforts to tell it to make it longer. I think the challenges depend a lot on the intended use. It's really hard to isolate one specific factor. And when I think of applying AI and machine learning, I tend to think about the predictive tools that are derived from patient data rather than other kind of lower hanging fruit, if you will, the image analysis and process automation and those other kinds of applications. And, thinking about it in this way, I think there's probably a couple of matters that probably take precedence. And first and foremost, and I think it's been a recurring theme throughout the workshop today is, the data on which the tools and models are built. And we historically have had a lot of difficulty trying to disentangle the biases and confounding in a lot of these real world data sets just in the research environment. And we also lack a lot of data in this environment. I mean, it's very difficult even to get genomic information put into an electronic health record these days in some institutions. So it makes it difficult to get to that level of deep phenotyping that you would want to be able to generate models from these kinds of data sources. And even if you were able to, patients aren't tested that way in the clinic. So it's not like you'd be able to have some new result that would allow an AI approach to guide the treatment. It's just the practice isn't caught up in that way. So because of this, I think a lot of times our focus is on observational studies and other data sources that are much richer data sets. And, those have their own inherent biases and issues with generalizability. So, I think just in terms of a solution on this front, it's important just to keep in mind what our data sources are at the design stage, make them as rich as possible, and try to build that external validity in up front. The other issue, and I don't want to belabor the point on the question, but in the precision medicine arena, there's been kind of variable uptake of new technologies and practices. Oncology is obviously very different than general primary care. So I think the second challenge is really more a matter of prescriber behavior. The tools that are generated really have to be clinically relevant, to stimulate uptake, and it has to fit into clinical workflows in a way that are imperceptible. I always point to the example of pharmacogenetic testing where there, despite potential benefits to patients, is really a lag in uptake, because it has to change the practice that prescribers have had for decades in some cases around some drugs, and warfarin being a good example of that. That's only been corrected at some level by implementation of testing at the institutional level rather than sort of the ground up with individual prescribers, but that's something I think that has to keep in mind. And, perhaps getting through some of these, adopting some of these lower hanging fruit, with image analysis and things of that sort will probably be a good first foray into making it more routine for the whole prescribing community.
Thank you so much, Mike. And now let's go to Dr. Foschini. Thank you.
Hi, everyone, and thanks again for the opportunity of being here today. From my perspective, I think the most important things we have to think hard about is to understand what can be publicly verifiable while still maintaining private secrets. I'm going to explain what that means. I feel like everyone is marveling at the achievements of AI in fields like text and images. And those achievements are predicated on the fact that there is a huge abundance of openly accessible data out there. Should it be used to train models? And maybe not. In fact, people are running into copyright issues. But the point is that the data is out there. You can train a model with that if you have a good amount of funding. Let's put it this way. This is just not going to happen in health, right? There are privacy concerns. There are IP concerns. So just try to apply that world of openness to health. I feel like it's a lost battle. But that doesn't mean we have to throw away the baby with the bathwater. You can still think about ways of verifying some property of a data set and of a model while keeping the data set and the model private. And computer science is full of examples like that. I mean, the TSL protocol on which HTTPS is based on asymmetry cryptography. What does it mean? It means that I have a private key, I can encrypt stuff, the world is a public key, everyone can decrypt it and prove that it was me and only me to write a message. Or you can use it the other way around. I can encrypt something publicly and only the recipient that has the private key associated to that public key is the only person that can decrypt it. So these are usually tricky things and predicated on like cryptography and hard math. But once they become infrastructure, once they become platform, they really enable these abilities of saying, okay, we cannot access the data, but you can compute a score of representativeness that proves to everyone that all ethnicities and all gender were represented as it's supposed to be. That's going to be hard, and it's going to take research. Other than some of this question is still open. Federated learning is just another way of private public combination of like you have a lot of data sets that are privately held, but then you can compute a publicly shared model. And I think there's going to be more and more use cases like that. And I think we have to start thinking about what are the things that we still could make public, we still could make transparent. To the point of Matt earlier, I did note that the Stat News analysis was not peer reviewed, and thanks for letting me know that there's a follow-up note there. But the point that he raises is that if that data they are challenging had been publicly available or publicly verifiable, right, we wouldn't even have this discussion right now. And so I think we have to move towards platforms and system or neutrally held third-party platforms where you can publicly verify private secrets. Representativeness could be one example, but model performance could be another one. Last thing I'm going to say is that at Sage, we've been running challenges for a long time. Challenges are open benchmark competitions similar to Kaggle, but for biomedical research. And one of the things we found is that, well, a lot of times people don't want to share the data. That the data needs to stay behind a firewall. And you can still run a challenge in which you compare different algorithms with each other without accessing the data. We call it Model 2 data setup. So that's another example, again, where it's not all public, it's not all private, but you can find that good balance to get folks to compete with each other and see who's the best on a certain task, while not revealing the data set behind the scene.
Thank you very much, Luca. Those are very helpful insights. Now let's hear what Dr. Tabassi think about this.
Thank you. Thank you to organizers for having me here. And I learned a lot by listening to the talks today. Building off of the things that has been mentioned, I think the biggest challenge for us is figure out how to measure, how to evaluate for the trustworthiness characteristics. So, and thanks for the shout out to AI-RMF to talk before just my talk, Luca. The trustworthy characteristics, AI-RMF in consultation with the community came up with some the characteristics that the whole community agree that we want to see in the systems to be trustworthy. And that also goes for the different applications of AI in healthcare. What becomes difficult and challenging is how we go do measurement of each of those, knowing that we have to do this measurement from the socio-technical lens and approach, and the traditional measures of the accuracy in terms of aggregate accuracy of the false match and false non-match may not be, or we know that they are not going to give the full picture that we want. So again, going back to the context, and it's important to understand the context of use. That basically means that there is no one size fits all for everything. If you want to go and measure bias, how do we go and measure that? And if you want to also measure bias in terms that we also understand the negative impact or consequence or harms of a systems or a model or an approach to the individuals or groups and communities, how those evaluations ought to be done. For a institution like us, NIST, I like to say that in our hundreds or so of existence, we have perfected the art and science on how to evaluate technology from the purely technical point of view, but with the AI systems, because they are a complex interactions of data, computation, environment, and human, we need new measurement tools. We need new standards on telling us how to all of these things. And that's what become the challenge. And that is my ask. NIST asks for engagement with the community to understand all of those things. In the recording that I sent you, I very briefly talk about the AI or RMF profiles, but listening to all of the talks and some of the discussions that we have with our colleagues at different agencies. So the profiles is going to be verticals, is going to be tailored guidance of the guidance in the AI RMF for a particular use. So what does, we heard it again here, what does the privacy for this particular application means? What does bias means? What level of interpretability we need for the particular applications? If you're using AI to look at a medical image and tell you if the tumor is there or not, the explanation that is given to the physician versus technicians versus patient is going to be different. So how we solve all of these things would be the challenge of our time, but I'm confident that there is a lot of really good brains working on this. So if we all put our heads together, we can find some solution to this problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tabassi. Now let's move to Dr. Lehar.
Sure. So the question as asked, as I saw it, was really what are the biggest challenges and opportunities that we see in this field? And when I look at this from our perspective, really what it boils down to is a few major factors that matter. The first is obviously safe sharing, and we're all very concerned about that. And that was actually raised by a number of the speakers before. How can you get different organizations to be comfortable with sharing information, either directly or indirectly, for us to answer the questions that really need to be answered? These are complex diseases when none of us can do it on our own data alone. The second is the complexity, right? So even when we share all the data, we're going to be overwhelmed by the complexity of the information. If you've got clinical information that's recorded in a number of different ways, you've got trying to combine that with molecular screens, stuff coming from images, dealing with those layers of complexities presents a huge challenge for the AI. And then the third big area of challenge is completeness. So even when you have complex data, very often bits of it will be missing. And in fact, most of the time what we run into is that, most of our institutes will have medical data with reasonable coverage, but what one institute records is very different from what another institute records. Some will have images, some will have molecular profiling. The modality of the molecular profiling will differ from one institute to the next. So how do you connect all that stuff together? And really what that boils down to is we need to turn, so there's really two layers of AI that we need to think about. One of them is how do we draw our scientific insights? But that usually comes with an assumption that you've wrestled the data into a form where you're going to actually do the insight in the derivation from it. So almost more important than that is what comes before, which is how do you get your data from its incomplete, locked up and complex form into something that you can actually compare across different sources. And there are a number of AI tools that can apply, that can be used to essentially fill gaps or clean up data or infer things that might that cut across them. And I think that's a huge area of growth and exploration in this field.
Thank you, Dr. Lehar. So Dr. Fakhouri.
Thank you so much, Chi, and thank you for the great workshop and the panel. I think my colleagues here, everyone really summarized nicely the opportunities and challenges, but I did want to touch on a few issues. So for us on the CEDAR side, in terms of some challenges that we're facing is related really to the risk of these products depending on the context of use. So, for example, if you're using an algorithm to predict a protein folding, that's outside of what the FDA would necessarily regulate. But if you're using it in the context of clinical research for counterfactual simulation, let's say of the placebo arm of a trial, then the risk is higher there. The closer you are to the person, the risk is higher. And the considerations that we would have for that certain application will be a little different. So I just wanted to mention this first. The second is this idea of AI, really the overlap in clinical research with the use of real-world data, real-world evidence, but also in the context of digital health technologies. That is very promising, but also complicates things a little bit. Because when we think about real-world data, we're talking about data from observational studies, let's say, or non-interventional studies. Even though these data may be really good in increasing the representativeness of the intended patient population, then you have issues related to data missingness, related to data standardization across different platforms, and how can I really compare the results that I'm getting with this data compared to this other data. So these are some complicating issues. One guidance that I'm really looking forward for it to come out, and Matt mentioned it, is the control change modification. This is also another issue that is a challenge for all of us in this field. These are learning algorithms. They're adapting. This is the point of AI, right? They're not necessarily locked algorithms. Any change that you do to the algorithm based on real world data, what is the risk associated with that? How is this risk going to be measured? And this will also be associated with the context of use. And then it will come back to us as regulators to understand the change and the risk associated with the evolution of these algorithms in the real world. So these are some of the challenges. The opportunities are massive, right? Like Matt was saying, like we heard from a lot of the presenters here today, this ability to have continuous data on individuals in the drug development process, but also in the real world, collecting this data is marvelous. I think this is, it's going to change how we do a lot of things, not just in terms of drug development pathways, but also to help patients adhere to their medications and be able to, take them the way they're supposed to take them. This is great. And for them to monitor their health at their homes, this is great, a great opportunity. But it then highlights, I think, the importance of having these continuous discussions between people from different fields, the data vendors, the data scientists, the statisticians, the epidemiologists, the AI tool developers. A lot of us speak about the same things and using different languages. We talk about the same things, but with different terminologies. So I look forward to all of us basically being synchronized on the meanings of the words that we use. And to that, CEDAR, hopefully this year, we're issuing a discussion paper, an RFI. We're soliciting feedback from all of you, from the public, on certain questions that are going to be very important for us as we think forward in terms of providing regulatory clarity for the use of AI in drug development. So please, please, please respond to it, provide us with your comments on the docket, and hopefully we'll be able to map out, some regulatory clarity moving forward to help you with your development with using AI for drug development.
Thank you, Tala. That's very helpful. Now, Dr. Diamond.
Yes, thanks. And I think that my colleagues here on the panel have done a great job in identifying, barriers and opportunities. And you already heard about some of our work in the action plan to address that. I just want to build on a little bit of what Tala just mentioned, the change control plan, which is essentially, that's a guidance we'll be putting out soon, essentially a description of change management within the life cycle of an AI-enabled medical device is intended not only to inform the evolution of a product over time, where changes and improvements in the product can be distributed. You could describe it globally, sort of to users broadly, but also to allow products to adapt to individual communities, clinics, and individual patients. And I think this is an important aspect of precision medicine that we hope to support through this effort.
Thank you, Dr. Diamond and Dr. Schuette.
Needed to unmute myself. One of the concerns that many of my colleagues and I have had is about where do we get the data to train these AI models? Even if we have a perfect AI algorithm, if such a thing exists, it's limited by the data that we use to train it. Dr. Topol talked a little bit about these types of devices that I'm putting on my finger right here with a pulse oximeter. These were trained on a not terribly diverse population many years ago, and we're still finding the problems out today. Even the choice of frequencies that were used for the device were selected on the basis of data that was perhaps not as representative today as we would like. So I think that's one of the commitments that we probably need to look across the board, not just at FDA, but all of our partners and collaborators, is are we attempting to get the right type of representation for the patient and subject population? And I think that going forward will be one of the key characteristics between possibly the more successful applications and replicating biases that may already exist within existing healthcare systems.
Thank you very much, Dr. Schuette, and that's a very, very enlightening discussion. And now let's take some questions from the audience. As time flies, we have many questions, and so it would be great if the panel members can keep the answers a little bit short. The first question from Paul: machine learning requires large amount of cleaned and annotated data. Who have access to such data right now, and how to enable access to least wealthy researchers? Anyone wants to take a shot?
I guess I can take this one. So the first answer is not many people have access to it, is the real answer, right? I mean, I think that even if you look at big and powerful organizations, they don't have access to nearly enough data for their ambitions. And if you look at non-powerful organizations or just general people outside, it's extremely limited what information is out there. So I think it's hugely important to encourage any kind of way to bring data sets into a way, into more accessibility. At the same time, we need to make sure that we don't completely throw everyone's information out to be misused or irresponsibly handled, or just add to the general world of confusion where we can't make sense of anything. So it's a huge challenge, but the answer is the data will always be distributed. One interesting idea, one interesting thing to think about, and I won't go too much into it, is how do you deal with the fact that as you collect ever more data and make it more accessible, how do you handle even the storage question? The reality is you'll probably have to keep everything locally, otherwise it'll very quickly get uncontrollable in many ways. And local storage it's possible to manage it, but you have to set things up to make that possible. And then and if you can do everything with local storage, it could go back to the stage where each individual organization owns and controls their data, and other people tap into it in ways that can be regulated. And that might answer your question of who owns the data. Hopefully, at the end of the day, you own your data, but we'll see.
Thank you. And I saw Luca raise your hand. Please go ahead.
Yes, to add to that, yeah, definitely, as we said, in all different languages, data in health is scarce. However, there are some options still for you out there. One of is with SAGE, the nonprofit organization that I lead, has a repository called synapse.org, 2+ petabyte of data across 11.5 projects with data governance that allows you to access data depending on how the consent will allow. We're one of the 9 repositories that are listed by NIH in the new data management plan that came into effect at the end of January. So really 3 weeks ago, NIH is making this big push. I don't know if you know, but 2023 is the year of open science. A lot of organizations are making a big push in towards open science and open data, and NIH has released this new management plan that really pushes folks to put data sets on repositories out there and worry about their governance for the long term. Data is more and more thought as a software, I would say. Like it's open is not enough, right? Like you can put your code in your own GitHub repository, but if you don't build a community around that, if you don't fix the bugs when they come through, nobody's going to use it. So it's really important to start thinking about how do we build communities around data. And at that point, I feel like we will solve the problem of feeling that there's not a lot of data around us, which is the feeling that we have today in health. But mostly really comes from the lack of F in FAIR, the lack of findability. The data is there, but it's poorly documented, it's somewhere, somewhat, in some format, and we don't know how to use it.
Thank you, Luca. And Matt?
Thanks. Well, I just want to briefly use this opportunity to raise awareness about the collaborative communities that we at FDA are participating in. And these are not communities that we convene, but we are there at the table with a broad array of stakeholders. There are about a dozen that we're participating in right now, including one focused on measurement and data, the MedTech Color Collaborative Community focused on diversity and inclusion, one focused broadly on AI/ML, and then there are some in particular clinical areas like pathology innovation and ophthalmology, where a large focus within that group is on machine learning. So really recognize that this is a community effort. Anything that can be done to promote a pre-competitive collaboration, and we're here to partner with you all and collaborate on these efforts.
Thank you so much, Matt. I know we're out of time, but there's so many questions. So let's try 2 more, and let's try to see if we can keep the answers short. And this question is for Dr. Lehar. So what standards have you used to map all the data, and how do you ensure that data that are mapped to the same concept, in fact, represent the same concept when you do federated learning? Thank you.
Yes, and I should also add that this question came from Kit, and Kit, when I saw that question, that actually inspired some of the things that I said earlier. So what you're speaking to really is the complexity problem, well, actually more the data quality problem, which is that data coming from different sources don't necessarily meet the same standards, and how do you align them? And in reality, how most people do it right now is through a painful harmonization process. So when you bring in a new institute into our network, for example, the first thing we have to do is look at their data, sit down with them together, and figure out how to line up their data to match up with what our models expect. So therefore, we can make it all make sense. For companies like Flatiron that are doing data aggregation, they essentially have to import the data and go through a cleaning phase where they turn it into a form where they can actually compare them across the board. This is a very painful manual process. I think some of the most exciting innovations that are happening out there are in companies that are investing in making that process easier. So there are a number of AI companies that are basically using NLP and other approaches to take the disparate, disconnected, confusing information that's in medical records, looking for common themes and connecting them together. And I think those kinds of capabilities will be really useful.
Thank you. And one last question. This is from Douglas. What is needed for FDA to accept the AI predictor as a companion diagnostic patient selection tool? Will the AI model withstand the scrutiny? So I think this is for our FDA colleagues. Maybe, Matt, do you want to tackle this first?
I think this is a really complex question, and I don't think we're going to be able to get into the particulars of this one, but I will provide an email address if you'd like, digitalhealth@fda.hhs.gov, and this goes for all questions related to digital health. If you want to have a dialogue with us, come and, I think a lot of this depends on the details, and we want to hear those details. Come to us also with, approaches for federated learning. Come to us with innovative approaches on data sharing and data utilization. We really would love to hear about it and can provide some feedback on an individual basis. So we're here. We're very accessible and would love to hear your questions and ideas.
Thank you, Matt. Anyone wants to add? If not, I think this concludes our panel discussion, and thank you to our panel members for your very insightful contribution to the discussion. And now I would like to invite Dr. Juga Gaburo for the closing remarks. Thank you.